And we're now joined by Professor Anyang Nyong'o, and now you'll help us with the political questions we were asking. Kwame and I had initially begun, but what was the highlight for you today? Let me just ask you from that end.
I think the highlight was really the speeches by the supporters. And the little girls first who presented the manifesto to the three principles, and then the supporters from all walks of life, young, middle-aged, professional, workers, activists, and so on, pastoralists. I think they made a very, very good contribution in appreciating the content of the manifesto and in identifying with the manifesto and giving reasons why they support the manifesto and what they expect from the court government. I think that was a good grassroots approach to launching the manifesto. Mm-hmm. And then came the speeches of the three principles, which were really focused. I mean, they didn't waffle, they focused on the document. They explained to the audience the content. They expressed themselves as to what roles they as individuals will play in the court government. And they came out as a team. And I think in his speech, the party leader and our presidential candidate, when he came with his Martin Luther King line, free at last, I mean, it was appropriate.
It captured the mood for you?
It captured the mood. And of course, the vice president, just before he introduced the presidential candidate, was really in his elements. I think this is one performance by the vice president that I think was just exceptional. I've not seen him so expressive and so involved as a person. Mm-hmm. I think we really liked it.
Well, he did promise to campaign like never before.
He did, and today showed that he's not missing his words, and that he's really gone into it, lock, stock, and barrel.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to rain in your parade. I just need to ask a few questions on behalf of my viewers. And one of the things that came up, should there have been a statement of the things that didn't go too well previously? Should there have been a statement of lessons learned before we got a statement of promise?
The problem is that you have a very short time on a day like that. You have a very short time. You have to put to the nation and to the world what you are going to do. Of course, what you are going to do is based on what you assess as having gone wrong, as having not been done. So rather than first explain what has not been done, it goes straight into it. I remember when we did the manifesto for NAC in 2002, democracy and empowerment. We had first of all to do a kind of a rundown of what had been going on in the previous regime, and then say, fine, we know that, but Kenyans want solutions. Kenyans want to know, where are we going to? So we said, well, we want to have democracy and empower the people. And democracy is not enough. You must empower the people economically. And I remember when I was Minister for Planning and National Development, and we said, now we must translate this into a policy, into a program. And the donors came to me and said, well, we have here the poverty reduction strategy paper and the government action program. I told them, look, that's good, but we have been elected on a manifesto, democracy and empowerment, and this is what I'm going to do to write the economic strategy for wealth and employment creation. Yeah, because this is what we promised. And you see, what we are now going to do as a court government, this is now the manifesto. The manifesto to a party, what a constitution is to a country.
Okay.
You see.
Before we get into the detail of that, what do you think about that question? Should there have been even just a flagging of the issues that were not championed prior to this new promise?
Well, I think Prof has explained it fairly well. It's because the interpretation of the state of now and what problems you're solving are a reflection of what you think didn't go right.
Yeah.
So obviously, to that extent, I think it's understandable. I also understand the time pressure, especially because this is broadcast on national TV, and you want to capture that for the audience, and obviously to communicate to those voters that. So it's a fair reflection, because this is an interpretation as a party or as a coalition of what we think has gone wrong, and then we therefore focus on solutions, which is what Kenyans prefer.
I'm sure you've been harangued by the money question. I'm sure that's one of the main things people are asking you. Fantastic promise, sounds good, easy to listen to, easy to celebrate, easy to cheer. Where's the money? How are you going to do this? How are you going to make this true in a country that is reeling under immense debt We've got a huge debt portfolio. How are you going to do this without taking us under completely?
My point has always been that if you acquire the debt for the right reason, you shouldn't worry really. If you acquire the debt to build infrastructure, to improve the productive capacity of the nation, to improve on human resources, then you're doing the right thing. But if you acquire the debt for consumption, then you're in problems, because you will never get any other way of getting money to meet the next consumption. And this is why I think it was very unfortunate that in the 1970s, 80s, when the money was very cheap in the international market, we borrowed for the wrong reasons, and for projects that never took off, like the Kenren project in Mombasa and so on. But now, as you can see, since the NAG government came in, we've been borrowing for the right reasons. You borrow to build roads, and you can see the roads. You borrow to improve the airport as an international hub, and you can see it happening. And then, of course, follows the results of the investment. If you improve the passenger intake at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport fourfold, of course you're getting taxes that you need to pay for more development, investment, and also to pay the human resources that run these facilities in terms of their salaries.
One step back, Prof, because you've said very well. For you, trouble is borrowing for the wrong reasons. You've identified as an era or a season where Kenya borrowed for the wrong reasons. Where did you draw the line? When did we fix that? Or now it's a continuance, and if it is, how would you repair that?
What we did, I think at the turning point really, was the economic recovery strategy for wealth and employment creation. We came in then as a NAG government when Kenya had a negative growth rate, 1.25 negative growth rate per annum. Within a matter of 3 years, we had turned it to 4 to 5% growth rate, and it was going on to 7. Had it not been for the disaster of the 2007 December elections, I think Kenya would have been now a flying eagle. But unfortunately, because of that, then the coalition government had to deal with tremendous problems of governance, which took us back. Now, what CORD is doing is now, with the new constitution, which we have fought for many years, and people who have been at the forefront for constitutional reform are now going to be in government of CORD. And some of us have been waiting for this moment for many years. We feel the opportunity has come, the time has come. It's Kenya's moment and now to take off as an eagle and realize the goals of Vision 2030. And I think we have the right leader to do that.
Pegging certain reasons for the trip-ups, are these reasons fair when we talk about bureaucracy, a shared government, and we say these are the things that slowed the process of flying like the eagle? As economists, as scientists in that area, do you share the same sort of hiccups?
Well, I think to be fair, yes, some of that was, yes, the borrowing did take place, and most of that money didn't even touch the country in the 80s and late, and even sometimes in the 90s. Some of it was exported back to accounts, and we're still dealing with that. More recently, I am concerned about borrowing for 2 reasons. One of them is that we are borrowing to pay salaries. The public sector wage bill is enormous. For the first time, I think, since the NAC government came in, the amount of money that is anticipated to be collected by the KRA during the last budget is much less than what we'd be paying in salaries. And that was even before the KRA itself failed to meet its targets. So we are chasing, we at a point where we could flip back to actually an unsustainable debt position. Of course, a student of economics would think that what does happen then is that growth over time extinguishes your debt. Right. But because we are behind in our growth targets of 10% as the vision, which of course succeeded the economic recovery strategy states, I think it's time for us to do that. And Professor Nyong'o, more than everybody else, as a former minister should know, or rather as a minister should know, that part of it are the demands of the public sector in terms of wages. So unless we bring, unless every party tells us very, very clearly how you're going to be dealing with the very strong public sector unions, which have been strengthened as well, rightly so, by the new constitution, then the problem of either borrowing or just raising money and using it to pay salaries without some money to invest in the infrastructure, which they say is one. And that I did not see clearly in this new manifesto.
Translation, Prof.
Yeah, sure.
You're spending, no, I'm making the translation. You're spending, you're asking for more money the money that is there isn't being spent in a way that benefits the country, we're already behind. So much so that there's a fear now. How would you bridge that gap? And how would you move us from getting money for just sustenance to money for planning in such a way that we're not completely buried in debt, unless you're telling me you're about to raise my taxes?
No, the point is that we must have an incomes policy. One good thing, the Constitution, is this institution that has been established, the Incomes and Remuneration Commission. Because for a long time I was saying that our problem is not because people are demanding more wages. Our problem is that we must have an incomes policy which rationalizes the difference between the lowest paid worker and the highest paid worker. If we don't do that, if we don't have an incomes policy, then of course this demand for more wages can spiral out of control. And I'm afraid that at the moment that may be the tendency, as Kwame has said. So what we'll have to do in the court government is to strengthen the Salaries and Remunerations Commission, make sure that Parliament does not go to haywire in trying to demand for more and more salaries in other sectors, but make Kenyans realize that savings is important. If you earn money and there are incentives to save, from those savings we can finance a lot of development projects. So you must not starve people wages. If you do, they will not have enough money to buy the commodities produced in the industrial area.
You're a planner, Prof. So, just fixing the wages,
yeah, so
that already will take a while.
No.
I'm not deviating. I'm just saying you want to fix the wage scenario. That will take a while.
It will not take a while.
And even if you fix that, to what extent will it relieve us of the debt?
No. It will not take a while. What I'm saying, I want to go step by step. Because if you try and grapple with the bigger issues before you get the ABCs of doing it, you'll get it wrong, you see. First and foremost, you really must have a national incomes policy. That's very important. And you must establish institutions that do that. And secondly, you must encourage people to save. And there are many ways by which you encourage people to save. One of the things we're proposing here is a housing policy that encourages people to buy affordable housing supported by government, like we did in the 1960s, the National Housing Corporation, which did a wonderful job building houses for low-income people, middle-income people, and so on. And you can see them up to this very day. Now, if you pump something like 10 billion shillings in National Housing Company or National Housing Corporation, and you say, look, we are going to provide housing for those, because housing is a big problem in this country. And then you'll say, fine, you are working, you have some savings, we want you to encourage you to buy a housing with interest rates that you can afford. There and then, the National Housing Corporation will be building houses which will create jobs, which will create demand for housing material and so on. And that is a basis, first, of dealing with unemployment, and two, creating a stimulus in economic growth by creating demands for inputs for housing construction. You see, so the two must go together. One, have an incomes policy, and two, encourage people to save, and three, provide them with where they spend that money productively for their consumption, because housing is consumed by people who buy it, want to live in it.
Is this anchored on Vision 2030? That question has been bandied about.
It is anchored in Vision, because you see, I'm so familiar with it because
Yes.
I was Minister for Planning and National Development at a very critical time,
Right.
but also very familiar with it because I'm very familiar with the manifesto, you see. And you see, it is important that we don't argue out of context. Ours is to build on what we have built in Vision 2030, but to deal with problems that have arisen in trying to implement Vision 2030. One of them is bureaucracy. Take, for example, the issue that I've been pursuing, universal healthcare. It's both bureaucracy and vested interests, you see. And those vested interests are very powerful because they're the kind of interests that will support the media to sing their song, that will support parliamentarians not to pass the necessary laws. You see what I mean? That will also enter government bureaucracy in terms of people who make decisions to drag their feet. So in this regard, you really need a leader that can push, that can say, look, gentlemen and ladies, we go this way.
Does this build your confidence, Kwame? Is there another area you feel needs to be flagged? Because one of the things about a good plan is it must win the confidence of those who are going to be part of it, either by trying to effect policy or those who will be enjoying policy that works.
Okay, let me just start by saying that I have looked at the summarized version of the CORD manifesto, if I may call it that, the coalition's manifesto. And one of the things that I see is I would not have arranged it any differently. because employment, which comes first, is one of the biggest problems, obviously. And I think even any student of economics accepts that most classical economists think that employment is a problem. You solve employment, you solve many other things. And Prof has talked to us about it. What I have a problem with is in terms of cost of living. And I think this proposal, the manifesto proposes that will bring down cost of living, makes certain suggestions, but two that particularly frighten me. One of those is that in order to bring down the costs of goods and services, I think it says that we will commit ourselves to a 5% reduction in inflation, where the assumption is that most of the inflation that affects us and therefore makes it difficult for poorer people to afford items is because of it comes from outside sources. The truth is, some of the biggest contributors to inflation is just the inefficiencies that exist in our country.
Sure.
So unless we put our sugar companies to competition and allow those that cannot compete to fail, so that Kenyans should not be buying sugar at a price that is higher
and not beg Commerce to continue with its concessions.
Precisely. If a Kenyan whose income is 1/15 what a German earns is buying sugar at 150% what a German does, obviously that's an injustice. And why? Because we have to maintain certain sugar companies, because there are political interests as well, or maize as well. We have certain farmers who have big farms, and so government protects them by first helping them to buy subsidized fertilizer, then on the other side controlling prices so that they still charge as highly. I think then it means you're supporting an industry, but not Kenya's people.
Sure, you're
so
right.
Sort out the market in such a way that if the market is effective, then don't open a back door.
You
have to fight that corruption also.
I couldn't agree with Kwame more. I mean, Kwame has hit it right on the head. There must be efficiency gains. If there are no efficiency gains, you're talking nonsense. Kwame, you remember in the 90s, I published a book, The Context of Privatization in Kenya, in which I advocated very strongly, one, a privatization bill, which was finally presented in Parliament. At that point in time, privatization was looked at as something rather Washington consensus, but it was right. And when it is right, whether it is Washington consensus or not, we must do it. Now, one of the things that I was saying is that sugar companies must be privatized. Because, I mean, the state has failed. That doesn't mean that the state always fails when it goes into business. China has showed us that the state can make a lot of profit. And very
I want this one to make
you
profit.
know, but we want to do it here.
Yes.
So, given that the history of the sugar company has shown tremendous inefficiency, tremendous wastage, a punishment of the farmers, and the figures are there, what we must do is privatize them. But there must be a way of privatizing them. One of the steps that we took in Parliament recently was for government to take over the debt, so that the balance sheet is clean, so that somebody coming to buy it is attracted to it to buy it. It is not inherit too many liabilities. Now, having done that, we should now go a step further and actually privatize these farms, and encourage farmers, workers, and the people to buy shares in the farms, without necessarily saying dogmatically that you get a private person or a private enterprise to invest there, and you impose a percentage on that private enterprise, which is completely unreasonable, because nobody is going to buy sugar farm as for charity. You know, they do it because of business. Right. So I think these are some of the things that we agree in the manifesto we must do for purposes of efficiency gains, increasing productivity, and making sure that farmers and consumers of sugar get value for their money. Now, another thing, when we're talking about efficiency and productivity, we have this mono attitude about sugar companies. There's no God-given law that says that sugar company must only produce table sugar. No. There are all kinds of byproducts, as has been seen in other cultures like Cuba. Ethanol, perfumes, vaccines, you name it.
What stops us from doing that?
Well, you know, again, bureaucracy and sins of the past. But when I was Minister for Planning and National Development, I took the sugar CEOs to Cuba to see what happens there. They came back and wrote very good reports, which we discussed at Windsor, Gulf Hotel. I thought they were going to be implemented. They never were. So again...
Actually, I like that you say that, because you've mentioned one of the things that you really need to put in place are institutions.
Yeah.
As we talk about sorting out the huge disparity in salary.
Yeah.
I was just talking to Kwame before you came in, and I was worried about this conversation going on after the 4th. Now, which is the institution you'll point a citizen to when the citizen wants to make sure that the promise you gave, this manifesto that was not a copy and paste, this manifesto that Professor Nyong'o didn't hide in his backyard and craft for a month and then emerge and give it. If there's so much work put in it, where would you point me to? So that I keep checking on this thing as we go.
First, the president. He's the team leader. And of course, the buck stops at his desk. And secondly, the party or the coalition. The coalition must be responsible for delivery. Now, this is what we're saying during this coalition government. We said at the very beginning, let's have a coalition governing council, something, a political body in the coalition that can be politically responsible for what we're doing. Of course, it was never there. So government was operating in a vacuum of politics. You see, you can't have policies pursued without a political context. So we should not make the mistake that we made in NAC, again, that we made in this Serikali ya Mseto. We really must have a coalition governing body or a coalition executive board somewhere where the coalition has a political engine that responds to the questions of the people regarding the promises that were made.
Flag an area where you think citizens need to look at, very importantly. I mean, you know, Prof is very good at this. He'll tell us all the rosy details of this, but I need to know, before I say I'm satisfied that the citizen is in for good promise, where would you point the citizen to?
I'd point the citizen to infrastructure and specifically to the railways.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about LAPSET, because LAPSET is connecting Kenya to other countries.
To other countries.
Mm-hmm. I'm talking about the railway that we have that is this year about 105 years old, since it was started. So what that tells you is that I did not see it in the condensed version, talking about the railway. Though, of course, you talk about the railways policy and urban railways and everything else. Part of the reason goods and services in Kenya are expensive is because they are transported by road.
Yeah.
Now, again, there's a cartel.
Yes,
that
there's a cartel, yes.
But the truth is, if we continue to export it, rather, if we continue to import and export through the roads, we will be completely inefficient.
Completely.
Because, look at it, construction costs in Kisumu and Nairobi, okay, differ by as much as 25 to 100%
Exactly.
by virtue of the fact that transporting cement from Kisumu to Nairobi, rather from Nairobi,
to
or
Kisumu.
Yes, from Athi River, wherever it is, to Kisumu, is so expensive. So we have to fix the railway, because these are not things that should be transported by road. And that's why you have those problems.
You're right.
There are entrenched interests that will definitely oppose you. I think you should make it very, very clear. If this government earns the mandate of Kenyans, you have to fix it. And I know there's a public-private partnership that has been gone into, and we have, which has been subsisting for 6 years, but the truth is that public-private partnership seems not to be working.
Sophisticated corruption, an area where, you know, you give citizens almost things like almost like social bribery. You know, give them one good thing, but behind, the government is leaking, the economy is leaking, treasury is leaking. The roads, that's deliberate. For
That's
that,
very
for
deliberate.
It's deliberate.
Yeah.
But how do we check on you? So that as a party, like you've said, you don't do the same thing. You don't engage in sophisticated corruption where we'll not see the railway working. Prof, you know this more than anyone. Development without a railway system, that's a myth.
Yeah, that's why I was saying, Louis, that first there must be institutions that keep people in check. There's no other alternative to that. And fortunately, these institutions are now inherent in the present constitution. That gives me comfort. But let me go back to what Kwame is saying. You know, in 2 or 3, I think the presidential candidate did mention it. We had it in the NAC manifesto that we'll build a standard gauge railway, and I really pushed for it. Kwame, remember, from Mombasa to Kisumu, Eldoret, into Uganda to Kigali, because we are thinking of it not just in terms of Kenya, but connecting us to the countries to which we export, because Uganda, you know, is our most important trading partner.
True.
In fact, the leading trading partner in the world today, as far as Kenya is concerned. So really to build the railway going there, standard gauge, using electricity, not these old museum-type railway that we have today.
The museum still runs.
Yeah, but the thing is that even this concessioning thing, I opposed it when I was Minister for Planning and National Development. I'm on record. I really opposed it because I knew it was not going to work, and it hasn't worked. So we are back to square one, where we have to build a standard gauge railway to the interior. The other thing that we must do in the city of Nairobi to make the city efficient, both in terms of communication and other things, is to have tramways No, light rail cars, because doing a subway is much more expensive when we can't afford it. Tramways are very easy to do. You do it and they can mix with cars and so on. That will make it much easier to come to KTN on a night like this. I didn't need to drive, you see. It would make it easier for people to get to the airport and catch their planes without this kind of jam that we have here. Right. So those are urgent. Those we cannot wait. So if we borrow to do that, I would understand. And then we must make sure, as you are saying, that while doing that, there's no sophisticated corruption going on, because that's also a leakage and a wastage we cannot afford. But finally, Kwame, one of the things that is so important about Kenya, and I've always said that Kenya is a country or a nation of a very high potential, but a disappointing underachiever. Take, for example, the lake. Really, in colonial times, up to some time at independence, we had very good mercantile trade on the lake, maritime trade and so on. The MV Victoria, MV Kamongo and so on were going on. They are no longer there. We had at the port of Kisumu one of the most promising railway workshops and dry dock.
East African railways.
Yeah, and the machines are still there. They have not been used for over a quarter of a century. The dry dock is not being used. The one in Mwanza is being used. Ferries are being made there. Ships are being prepared. Boats are being made. Ours in Kisumu has been dead for about a quarter of a century. And it is still there. It can still be used. These are the kind of potential that we should awaken so that we can achieve what we should have achieved many years ago. But it's never too late. God is there.
I need to close this. So what would you say as an issue that would help us, or one area where you tell the citizen, we shall be checking on this after every quarter period, and these will be the indicators?
Okay, I think the other is the wages policy is important, but I think one of the other things that all parties should do is to commit themselves to understanding what the labor supply and labor market in Kenya is like. Because this party mentioned specifically, or rather the manifesto mentioned specifically, that you're committed to a income redistributive policy. And I wonder how you can redistribute income in a country in which those who have formal sector jobs are 3 million, even less. The rest of the country is 37 million. You can only redistribute much. So as we talk about NHIF and NSSF, these very bodies which I am not particularly fond of, Prof, because they're completely non-transparent, not to mention corrupt. So if you're asking each of us to give in some more money to this, you're actually asking us to fill up a pot that is broken up at the bottom. So unless you actually fix this, and part of fixing them, to be honest, is to actually change the people who run them. It's not for me to suggest how you do that, but as a person who's contributed to NHIF and NSSF, I have very little confidence in its managers. They're probably very educated and all that, but I don't think they have their pulses in the right place. So yes, redistribute income, but redistribute it efficiently. Because even the maize scandal, or what came up of the subsidy around maize, was about redistributing income and helping us, and you know how it comes about. So inefficient redistribution necessarily leads to corruption. So take care of that as well.
Prof, as you respond, and I will close the response. I've got to close this. But comment, that pot is not broken. There's a deliberate hole that has been neatly cut out at the bottom because it feeds into something else. But this leads me to just the very important thing, building the confidence. A promise can be written so well, it can be given so well, it can be announced beautifully. Will you have the confidence? What, for example, will you make as a dramatic indicator in terms of maybe leaders of these institutions, in terms of maybe restructuring the way these institutions work? So that now when Monenchi says, I'm being taxed, they are confident it will be used well.
Yeah, you know, Kwame, you have two choices. One is demolish the house. This house is not good, demolish it, build it new. That's a possible choice. You ask yourself, do you have the resources to do that? The other one said, well, this house is wobbly, let us restructure it. Let us see how we can restructure it and strengthen it so that it can do better. And that's what we decided to do with the NHIF, and that's when we brought in IFC and so on. And we had a good game plan. The trouble is that people get very impatient. They say, no, that game plan, yes, it is good, but knock out these heads, let them go off. And if you knock out the heads, collective memory goes, you may find it very difficult to follow the game plan that you have put in place.
So more plaster.
So what happened was that you know, people did not want to appreciate the game plan that is for restructuring to make it work more efficiently. I did it very successfully with KEMSA, Kenya Medical Supplies Agency. I did it very successfully with the technology and board. You know, we did it very successfully with Kenyatta National Hospital. You see, but NHIF is kind of emotive. So Kwame wants to see instant solutions, like an instant cup of tea. It doesn't work in the real world.
I just need you to build confidence.
And that's why we're building confidence. Now, one of the things that we must build confidence, I agree with Kwame, leadership is very important.
As we close now.
As we close, I agree with Kwame, leadership is very important, that you must put faces that people have confidence in. I agree with you entirely. And changes in leadership is very important, because when you change leadership, somebody comes in like restructuring a company, you get a new CEO. Yes, sure, definitely.
You'll do this?
Definitely. In fact, I did it in KEMSA, at the board, at Kenyatta, and so on, MTRH and all that.
So CORD will do this?
CORD will do this, I'm telling you. We are committed to it, because we have seen it work in our own situation. We know it has to work if our manifesto is going to be implemented successfully. And we know there's so much potential in Kenya. There are so many people, good people, who can do things. People like Kwame here, people like you here, young people, very motivated, waiting to be given the opportunity. They have to be given the opportunity.
Thank you,
so there you saw Babu Namwamba and Kerry, young people doing a wonderful job. That is a sign of the times that things to come are great. CORD is there.
CORD is there. Well, Kwame, thank you very much for sharing. The responsibility I'll give you is we shall have to do a more sort of evaluation. We'll have to check this as we go along, quarterly perhaps.
Yeah.
And Prof, I will be tying you to your promises.
Sure.
I will remind you of that special line you've dropped, that CORD is there.
Yes.
When things start going upside down and I drop that line, and you don't disown it, Prof.
I won't.
Right? Thank you for sharing your time with us this evening.